Okay, hey, hello everyone. It's me, the Professor here, and in this video, I want to go ahead and say a few things about the readings and the topics going on for the sixth week of the session. So yeah, time's getting away from us, everybody. We're coming down to the wire, and for this video, I want to go ahead and say a few things about what's going on with the post World War II period as we get into the 1950s. And the 1950s, of course, is regarded in American culture, American society, as this great time, this fun time. There's like 57 Chevys, rock and roll Elvis, uh, ice cream floats, happy days, that type of thing. But obviously, like in anything in United States history and United States culture, there was much more than met the eye than what a popular culture and media and TV and movies and magazines, books, all of that would have you to believe. And that's clearly no exception with the 1950s. So before you get into a little bit of the topics and the themes which are affected Chicanos in the 1950s, go ahead and take a look at the PowerPoint program about the foreign policy program in the 1950s, which started after World War II. This is the policy of containment. And basically the way it works, of course, for all the details, you can look at the program. Let me give you a sense in terms of what containment was all about. Once World War II came to an end, all the big allies at the time, of course, we're talking about the U.S. with President Roosevelt, who died in 1945, and then of course you had the British with Winston Churchill, and the Soviets with Joseph Stalin. Uh, the uh, the uh, the unity, the allies, the sense of togetherness that all three countries had with respect to fighting off against Hitler and Nazism began to fall apart as the war was wrapping up, especially as the Soviets began to close in toward Berlin in 1945, and the Soviets had conquered much of Eastern Europe. So all the countries that we know in Eastern Europe today, like Poland, what used to be Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Ukraine, and of course Ukraine is still a bit of a problem spot in the world today. All of those were conquered by the Red Army back as World War II was wrapping up. And this was especially the case after the epic battle in Stalingrad in 1943. After Stalingrad in 1943, and that's the town, I think the town is now called Volgograd. After that pretty much ended Hitler's ambitions for an Eastern Empire as the Red Army began pushing further and further west from there in toward Berlin up until the time when Hitler committed suicide and the war finally ended in May of 1945. But to make a long story short, as the Soviets were, you might say, consolidating their rule over Eastern Europe, many of the foreign policy people in the State Department after Roosevelt died and when Harry Truman became president began to worry about this idea of what Winston Churchill called an Iron Curtain. That is, Stalin was not going to give up any of his gains militarily in Eastern Europe. He's going to stay put, not pull back Soviet troops after the war ended. So Truman's people were concerned about the spread of communism, the spread of Bolshevism, whatever you want to call it. And Truman's people were quite concerned as to what to do with respect to the possible spread of communism into Western Europe, because as the European countries began to get out of the ashes of World War II, of course, in places like France and Greece, Western Germany, and of course in Great Britain too, there was fear of, well, how do you build back the country after all this devastation, which millions of people had died? And the fear was that communism would be a welcome alternative to Western liberal democracies. So Truman's people in 1945 on began to debate how to deal with you might say, the advancing spread of communism. And one of the State Department officials was a man by the name of George Kennan. George Kennan was one of the he was the sort of, you might say, one of the foreign policy experts behind Dean Acheson, who was the main leader of the State Department, especially after Truman won re-election in 1948. And Kennan believed that in order to prevent the spread of communism, you've got to contain communism. So hence, that's where the idea of containment came in. You can't wipe out communism, you have to contain it. That is, deny communism. Well, let's put it this way. Communism, in the words of the State Department people, was like a disease or a virus that it looked for weak bodies, for host bodies that were weak, that were run down. So a disease looks for the weakest individuals, the weakest things, and then it takes root in the weakest bodies. So what Kennan was arguing was the fact that what you do with communism is that you contain it. You make sure you prop up these countries, these institutions, so that they can fight off against communism as if communism was like the flu, like I don't know, Ebola or whatever that disease that you hear about, of course, in Western Africa. So to make a long story short, containment was the idea of ensuring that communism stays confined within the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, doesn't make its way into, say, France, Western Germany, because remember everybody, after World War II ended, Germany was split into 4 quadrants, 4 quarters. So that's why after World War II, you had East Germany, which was communist. Okay, sorry everybody. Yeah, my screensaver came on, so I couldn't see you guys there for a second there. So after World War II, you had East Germany, which was communist, and then Western Germany, which was the quarters that was divided by the United States, France, and Great Britain. Those are Western liberal democracies. So you might say West Germany was free, was capitalist, and East Germany was communist. So the thinking was you keep communism where West Germany is and the west of Eastern Europe, but don't let it come into West Germany, and of course France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, and of course Great Britain, Ireland, and all the other parts of Western Europe. So that's basically the gist of containment. So when you have this idea of containing communism on a foreign level, that's where things like NATO, like the United Nations come into the picture, the Marshall Plan, all the stuff that's covered in great detail in the PowerPoint program. When you have all these things happening on the world stage, not surprisingly, it leads to shall we say, repercussions in the United States. So you might say, even though containment was, you might say, a foreign policy project in Europe, and by extension in other parts of the world where fears were that communism, especially from the case of the Chinese, would spread into parts of Southeast Asia. That's where, of course, Vietnam comes into the picture, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, those countries. I do a lot more of this stuff in my U.S. classes at Grossman College. But when you've got this idea of containment on an international level, not surprisingly, the fear is that it's going to, you might say, seep in on a domestic level. So what happened in the United States was that you had this notion of containment culture. That is, you look for communists, that is, in addition to fighting off communists in Europe and in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, or wherever, you look for the communists, you root them out in the United States. And that was the idea of containment culture. And that containment culture, you might say, is our jumping off point for what's happening in for Chicanos in the 1950s. So go ahead, after you look at the PowerPoint program with the Chapter 9 in the Crucible of Struggle book, in which Vargas talks about how U.S. policies were designed to in essence, promote this idea of fighting the communists. That's where Senator McCarthy comes into the picture. That is, he believed that communists were the State Department. And if any of you have seen the classic film from the 1960s, The Manchurian Candidate, not the one that Denzel Washington made, but the one that Frank Sinatra came out in back in the early 1960s, that is a perfect example of how containment culture, you might say, really took root in the United States in the 1950s in the person of Senator Joseph McCarthy back in the mid 1950s. And some of the things that Vargas points out were policies which not only were designed to, you might say, go to the root of trying to find these evil, dirty communists, but these policies also had many effects on Chicanos, on Mexican Americans with respect to mobilizing and activism. So a lot of things that say like Luisa Moreno and Emma Tenayuca had been doing before the World War II period, into the World War II period, you might say the brakes were put on these activities because of the political culture in the United States, and that's what Vargas gets into in great detail in Chapter 9. All right, after you check out Chapter 9 in the Crucible of Struggle book, go ahead now and move on to the reading by Mario Garcia and Beyond 1948. Garcia talks about the Asociación Nacional Mexicano-Americana, which was one of the very progressive Chicano organizations in the post-war era, but not surprisingly because of the political culture in the 1950s. the Asociación or ANMA, as it was called, didn't last for very long. By the late 1950s, you might say it became a victim of containment culture in the United States. But in terms of its impact on a long-term level, Bart Garcia does a great job of analyzing how, despite its short history, you might say paved the way for other groups to come on the scene, especially as we get into the 1960s. So check out the Garcia reading after you take a look at the containment. I'm sorry, after the Vargas reading from Crucible of Struggle. Okay, now another article that Garcia does, he takes a look at, you might say, more not so much not microeconomic, but micro political things with respect to what's happening in the city of El Paso in Texas in the late 1950s. Garcia talks about the election of Raymond Diaz as mayor of El Paso. And well, this is really fascinating because what Garcia points out is that much like in modern American politics, that is, when you have the guys running for president, whether it's, say, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and his father George H.W. Bush, they had these guys, these mean, tough guys. I mean, for like these were nasty sons of bitches. You know, they were mean, they were tough, they didn't pull any punches. So when the candidate came across as a great man, oh, I'm for all of you Americans and opportunity and this and that, blah blah blah. I'm just like you. I come from a small town. I'll have a beer with you and coffee, whatever. Beyond that rhetoric, there's a tough guy behind the show who's not afraid to, well, you might say, be mean and nasty, beat up some people. I mean, I'm talking about literally, figuratively, not literally. And for example, in the case of Barack Obama, he had guys like David Axelrod, who were the tough guys. George H.W. Bush, the father, he had a man by the name of Lee Atwater, who was a student of what Richard Nixon's guys had done back in the 1960s. Bill Clinton had James Carville, the Raging Cajun from Louisiana, as he was called, and then George W. Bush had Karl Rove. Rove still does some stuff right now on Fox News, but Rove was the guy who helped to engineer Bush's elections in both 2000 and 2004. Well, what Garcia points out is that in the case of El Paso, Raymond Diaz had that nasty guy. That was his brother. He talks about how Richard Diaz was the guy who didn't pull any punches. Well, Raymond was the guy who was talking to the veterans, meeting the little old ladies at the bridge club, the bingo club, going to the churches, kissing babies, going to the schools, the ice cream socials, all of that fun stuff. Richard Diaz was the guy who was pulling no punches, and you might say the man behind the plan, the tough guy behind the scenes. And what I like about this article is the fact that in any politics, so whether it's national politics or local politics, you have to have this mean, tough guy. And I think Garcia does a great job of pointing out how even in the case of El Paso in the 1950s, Raymond Diaz had to realize that he had to appeal to more than just the Tejano population. He had to appeal to a broader sector of people. It was Richard Diaz who understood that type of a mentality, and you might say he was one of the forerunners of how to organize a modern political campaign. In this case, for the mayorship of El Paso. A really fascinating article, so definitely check it out after you check out the readings of that Garcia pointed out about the ANMA Association. Okay, finally, let's finish off the week with movie time. Let's check out the classic film Salt of the Earth. This film came out in the 1950s, and of course, not surprisingly, this was a film that was not well received by many of the politicians back in those days. The fear was that, oh my gosh, it's a pro-labor film, it's communist, it's this, it's that, it's subversive, it's nasty, blah, blah, blah. And to this day, even though the film itself is even though the film itself is 60 years old, it still has, you might say, a bit of controversy surrounding it. It's nothing that you really see popularized that much in terms of American history, political science classes. I would venture to argue that the only place you'll see Salt of the Earth is in these Chicano studies classes. My colleague, Professor Ornelas, he has the film, he's had the film in the past for his Chicano film class. So I'm going to go and bring it here. But what I like about the film is that it shows that that issues which relate to things such as whether it's sanitation, better wages, working conditions, child care, all of that stuff, which ostensibly you might say the men are the one who take the charge of being, well, we men, we know the union stuff, we know about this and that. You ladies, you just take care of the kids and fix the dinner, wash the clothes, all of that stuff. So my point is that even within the Chicano movement, you had this mentality of that it was the men, los señores, they were the ones who knew everything, and las señoras, the ladies, they kind of stood back in the background. What Salt of the Earth tells you is that that's not true. In order for an effective movement to really get going, you got to have everybody involved, whether it was from the elderly, whether it was the teens, the young kids, but more importantly, you got to have the women involved. Emma Tenayuca and Luisa Moreno understood this. Dolores Huerta understood this, and I think the main character in the film, the main female character, Esperanza, she definitely understands this too. And the film, again, does a great job of showing that even within a union movement, to try to fight for better conditions, there are still some tensions, lingering perspectives that have to be dealt with. And once those tensions and animosities and feelings are finally brought to the table and dealt with, then can the organization, the movement, really start to achieve some success. I think for the most part, Cesar Chavez took me a while to really understand this, and thankfully Dolores Huerta, she was strong enough to realize that, hey Cesar, you got to get the ladies involved. You men, you guys, you can't just say, oh, we know everything, we know this, we know that. We got to get involved too. And again, Salt of the Earth demonstrates this lesson, and so this will be the lesson that you're going to be checking out as the week comes to an end. Okay, all right, so that's the plan for the week. So again, the post-World War II era, that's the stuff we're going to be looking at for the week. So so definitely go ahead and get going on the readings, and I hope you like all the readings, and especially I hope you like the Salt of the Earth film. And that's it from here. That's it from El Profesor. We're coming down to the wire, so I only have about 2 more videos left to go, in which I gave you these previews of the readings. And of course, anything else I need to mention before we get to the end of the session, I will definitely address that in a future video. Okay, well that's it from here, everybody. You guys take care, take it easy, and enjoy this first week of autumn. And I'll talk to you guys again very soon.